key modern railways. In-depth railway news.
Hello and welcome to the preview of the March 2021 edition. Still in the studio, of course. Still, it's nice and warm in here. Here's the cover. Special feature this month on the East Coast route. Some of my best train journeys have been on that route. But if I tell you of fond memories of steak, chips and red wine with a sea view from a comfy seat, then you'll know that it wasn't a recent trip. At least the sea view is still there, well, from most of the seats anyway. Okay, well, once again we have a packed magazine for you. And that's despite our confinement. And here is the editor, Philip Sherritt, to tell you all about it. Philip.
Thanks very much, Ian, and good to be speaking to you again. So for the March issue of Modern Railways, we have a suite of 3 features about the East Coast Main Line. Now there's lots going on the East Coast Main Line at the moment. There's a series of infrastructure upgrades, and all of that is directed towards increasing capacity and a new timetable being introduced in May 2022. The 2 most visible infrastructure projects are at Werrington, north of Peterborough, where there's a dive under being built, and there was a major milestone for that in January when the concrete box which will carry the tracks underneath the main line for the dive under was pushed into place. The second major project is at King's Cross, and that's just about to start its most important phase, where half the station's time will be closed over a 3-month period, while the layout at the station throat is reconfigured. And the eventual output from this will be there'll be 6 approach tracks with faster approach speed, and that will create the additional capacity. So you can read in the magazine about what's happened at Werrington, what work they've still got to do there, and what's planned over that time at King's Cross. So speaking of the May 2022 timetable, the second feature is with LNER, where we talk to their Managing Director David Horn about plans for the operation on the East Coast Main Line. And this does include some timetable stuff, but also about ticketing, reservations, and prospects for the main line in the post-COVID world. And then completing the trio is a feature about the plan to introduce European train control system signalling at the south end of the main line. Now, an area we've written a lot about in Modern Railways is Manchester, the railways around there, and particularly the Castlefield corridor, that congested 2-track section through Piccadilly and Oxford Road stations. In January, the initial report from the Manchester Recovery Task Force came to fruition in the form of a consultation on 3 timetable options to reconfigure services around Manchester with the aim of improving performance, which has been deteriorating over a number of years. Richard Harper, who works for Steer, was closely involved with the work of the Manchester Task Force. So he's written an article for us explaining what the task force has done, what it was set up for, and what the work has been so far. And this is an interesting perspective on a really important issue which affects railways across the north of England. So we present Richard's feature alongside details of the 3 options for consultation that have been presented. And you'll be able to compare those with the December 19 service, which is the pre-COVID timetable. Now, in my own patch here in the East Midlands, in January, East Midlands Railway held a press briefing and released a lot more details about its new bi-mode trains for the Midland Main Line. These are the Class 810s, or the Auroras as it's calling them. These are built by Hitachi, but they have a lot of features which are different to the other Hitachi trains in service with other operators. They've got shorter vehicles, they've got more diesel engines, the equipment's packaged differently, a different front end nose, and there's lots of interior differences as well, and in particular the seats. EMR has worked with its design company DG Design in Derby and Hitachi to tweak the FISA lean seat, which has been introduced on Greater Anglia Stadler trains, to try and make it more comfortable and deliver an improved version. Now, obviously, the man who's written most for us about seats is Ian, so we couldn't let this pass without setting him up for an interview to find out about the work they've done. Was he impressed? You'll have to read the magazine to find out. And then lastly, we have write-ups of presentations from our Rail in Wales and the West conference, which we held as 3 online sessions during January. And you'll be able to read updates from Great Western Railway, Network Rail, Transport for Wales and many others besides. And among that, you'll also be able to see a picture of the first Transport for Wales Class 197 DMU that's been built at CAF's factory at Newport. And that should be out on test, hopefully, on the North Wales coastline this spring. So there's plenty to read about in the magazine, and I hope you find it enjoyable. And I hope you find it also easy to get hold of the magazine, buying it in the shops, subscribing or ordering online. So that's it from me for another month. Thanks for your attention, and I'll hand back to Ian.
Thank you, Philip. A lot in there. I don't know about you, but I can barely finish reading the last one before the new one's coming up. Now, on to our industry and technology editor, better known as Captain Deltic, or even Roger Ford. Apparently, ORR were a bit put out by his article last month, and to be fair, can you imagine that a bunch of civil servants in London may not have a full command of signalling developments? Yes, so can I know who I believe, and here he is now. Roger!
One of my jobs as industry and technology editor of Modern Railways is to make complicated matters accessible to the general reader. These can range from traction power systems to franchise agreements or lease rentals. This month we have two such jobs. The first one goes back to 2007 when the government first argued that the prospect of fuel cell hydrogen power would make overhead line electrification obsolescent. And we've had a repeat of that when questioned on East West Rail and why it wasn't being electrified. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps suggested that batteries or hydrogen might leapfrog the existing technology. Anyway, so that set me off, and I have gone into some detail of the technology of hydrogen fuel cell power, where the hydrogen comes from, and an analysis of where you really do save on CO2. And I can tell you it's not replacing a few DMUs on the far north line or Carl line with a converted EMU with fuel cells. After that, there's more on fuel cell power. Transport Scotland has decided to build its own fuel cell demonstrator and is converting a Class 314 EMU, which it hopes to show at COP26, the Climate Change Conference in Scotland in November. The work is being done by a firm called Arcola Energy, who have a lot of experience of fuel cell power on road vehicles, and I had a fascinating interview with the managing director, and there are quite a few insights about how you actually put fuel cells into a train. After that, it's another quite technical issue concerned with the dynamics of rail vehicles. It's a follow-up to my original piece on the RAIB report on the collision at Neville Hill, where an Azuma ran into the back of an IC125 with a closing speed of about 10 miles an hour, low speed collision. However, what happened was that the bogies of the second and third vehicles derailed sufficiently to the side into the 6 foot that they'd have been hit by a passing train. So why did that happen at such a low speed? Well, there's a story of dynamic modelling of the train and why it happened. But more importantly, it all goes back to the specification for the IEP, which was the forebear of the Azuma, where DFT decided to go for maximum length without taking into account the ability to, the effects of going around very narrow curves. The third concluding item is TinWatch, as always. And what I've done here, instead of focusing on the performance of the new trains, which is pretty depressing in general, I've looked at all the fleets across the network to see just how fleet mileage has come down compared with before lockdown. And there's some interesting figures in here. And in the case of, obviously it varies with which operator, but in the case of Intercity, fleet miles are down by something like 20%. So that's all for the March issue. I do hope that I've succeeded in making it intelligible to the general reader, and I hope you enjoy reading it. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. So that brings me to my Pan Up column, and once again I'm forced against my will to talk a bit about environmental policy. I know this magazine is called Modern Railways, not Trees Today, but the whole industry is being guided or misguided by a half-baked policy from 2 years ago. That came from a speech by short-term caretaker manager Joe Johnson, who said he would like to see diesel-only trains taken off the rails by 2040. That, for want of a better description, policy is now starting to seriously lead the industry astray. For example, it makes it a priority to get rid of 2-car DMUs operating a few trains a day along rural lines, while we can keep running 9-car diesel IET trains from Parkway to Penzance as long as we like. Anyone can see this is nuts, so why does the industry just lie back and take it? I'll explain that in the article, but suffice to say there's a lot of money to be made. The policy pushes the energy wasting hydrogen agenda, putting a priority on the 10% of lines which carry the fewest passengers. Again, why does the industry go for this stuff? All will be explained, and it's not some cranky conspiracy theory, it's just where the rules of the game take us. I think a phrase from a few years ago covers it, which was due to the unique way the UK organises its railways. On the other hand, the freight business can afford to remain aloof from all this nonsense. They've correctly said that there is no substitute for diesel haulage for them, and since freight by rail is 4 times more efficient than freight by road, why should there be? What I think we would all like to see is more freight going by rail and making more use of the electric railway. If you can do that, the freight can be moved not 4 but 6 times more efficiently than by road. The long promised Class 93 has now been revealed, and this loco really will make a difference to the freight business, since it will enable freight to make more use of electrification and thus lower costs. The Class 93 is a real step forward, and what better time to start looking for new freight diagrams than now the passenger services are being thinned out a bit. If there is a better way of building back better, I don't know what it is, but no doubt the DFT will keep looking. Sorry, I should remain positive though. This really is a 100% good news story. Well, that's it for another month. I hope you enjoy the magazine. Now, as for a closing and finally upbeat message, I think I've already done that. Bring on the Class 93. Bye all, see you next month.
Visit www.keymodernrailways.com for more interesting and essential information about the British Railway Network.